In early 1945, Tokyo was a city living on borrowed time. Once a symbol of Japan's modernization and imperial pride, it had become a wooden labyrinth of narrow streets, crowded homes, and overworked civilians. The empire's capital still glowed at night, but its light came more from burning desperation than from hope. Food was scarce, fuel was rationed, and the sound of air raid sirens had become part of everyday life. Yet few in Tokyo imagined what was truly coming. A storm of fire unlike anything the modern world had ever seen. By that winter, Japan's situation had become dire. The war that once seemed destined for victory had turned into a slow collapse. The empire had stretched too far, from the jungles of Burma to the ruins of Manila. American submarines strangled Japan's supply lines, and the U.S. Navy ruled the Pacific. Still, the Japanese government refused to surrender. They urged civilians to endure, to sacrifice, to fight to the bitter end. Meanwhile, across the Pacific in Guam and the Mariana Islands, the Americans had built new, massive air bases. From there, the Boeing B-29 Superfortress, the most advanced bomber of its time, could reach Japan's heart. The planes were faster, could fly higher, and carry more bombs than anything before them. But the first bombing missions over Japan had failed to deliver decisive results. The weather, high-altitude winds, and Japanese defenses all limited accuracy. Industrial targets in Tokyo remained largely untouched. General Curtis LeMay, the hard, unflinching commander of the XXI Bomber Command, was about to change that. LeMay studied the reports. He realized that Japan's war production wasn't confined to big factories. It was scattered, small workshops hidden in homes, women and old men assembling aircraft parts and munitions in back rooms and sheds. Destroying Japan's war effort meant destroying the cities themselves. And Tokyo, with its millions of wooden homes packed tightly together, was a perfect target for fire. At the same time, in the streets of Tokyo, life continued in a strange rhythm of denial and endurance. Children practiced bucket brigades for fire drills. Civilians dug air raid shelters in their backyards, covering them with thin layers of dirt and bamboo. Housewives carried woven baskets filled with meager rice rations, often traded on the black market. The radio played military marches and patriotic songs, telling the people that Japan would never fall. But the sky above them was already turning dark with the shadow of American bombers. In February 1945, U.S. forces captured Iwo Jima, a tiny volcanic island halfway between Japan and the Marianas. The capture gave American bombers a new advantage: a safe emergency landing spot for damaged planes and a base for fighter escorts. The noose around Japan tightened. Still, in Tokyo, many clung to a fragile illusion that the capital, the Emperor's city, would be spared total destruction. The government had moved many industries underground, but the population remained. Over 9 million people still lived in the Tokyo area, most in homes made of paper, bamboo, and wood. Then came the order from Washington. intensify the air campaign. LeMay's new strategy would abandon precision bombing altogether. Instead of targeting factories, his planes would fly low, around 5,000 to 9,000 feet, and drop clusters of incendiary bombs designed to ignite massive fires. The bombs would not explode. They would burn. Napalm-filled cylinders and magnesium sticks would scatter flames across entire neighborhoods. The mission was simple and brutal: to burn Tokyo to the ground. In early March, preparations began in secret. The crews were briefed. Remove all defensive guns except the tail turret to lighten the planes and carry more fuel and incendiaries. The B-29s were stripped down, loaded with M69 and M47 incendiary bomblets. Weapons that could turn a wooden house into an inferno in seconds. LeMay's men knew what it meant. This was not just an attack on military targets. This was total war. On the ground in Japan, rumors spread. Some said the Americans would soon attack Tokyo itself. Others dismissed it. After all, hadn't the city survived countless smaller raids? But on the night of March 9, 1945, the calm was deceptive. The wind that evening was strong, dry, and steady from the north. Perfect conditions for fire to spread. The people of Tokyo went to bed uneasy, unaware that hundreds of bombers were already in the air, crossing the dark waters of the Pacific. As midnight approached, the sound of engines began to fill the distant sky. At first, some thought it was thunder, but the rumble grew deeper, heavier, continuous. Sirens wailed across the city. Searchlights swept the clouds. Anti-aircraft gunners scrambled to their posts, but they were too few, too slow. The bombers came in low, black shapes against the night sky, invisible until it was too late. Tokyo's calm was over. What followed would erase entire districts, burn tens of thousands alive, and leave more than 1 million homeless. The raid would become the single deadliest air attack in human history, worse than Dresden, worse even than Hiroshima. But in those final quiet minutes before the first bombs fell, the people of Tokyo, mothers, children, soldiers, and old men, still believed they might survive the night. They still believed in the emperor's protection, in Japan's destiny, in something beyond fear. They were wrong. The inferno was about to begin. The night of March 9, 1945, began like any other in wartime Tokyo. Tense but deceptively quiet. The wind hissed through narrow alleyways, rattling paper windows. Civilians, weary from weeks of air raid warnings that led to nothing, drifted to sleep believing that perhaps this night too would pass uneventfully. They could not have known that over 300 B-29 Superfortress bombers were already crossing the Pacific, carrying nearly 2,000 tons of incendiary bombs, and that within hours, their city would become an ocean of fire. At around 10:30 p.m., radar operators in Japan detected incoming aircraft, but the alert came too late. The first American Pathfinder bombers appeared over Tokyo shortly after midnight, dropping magnesium flares that lit up the sky like artificial suns. The flares illuminated the target zones, the working-class districts of Shitamachi, east of the imperial palace. This area was chosen deliberately. It was densely populated, built almost entirely from wood and paper, and home to the small workshops that fed Japan's war industry. The Americans called the operation Meeting House. His goal was not to cripple but to annihilate. At 12:08 a.m., the main wave of bombers arrived. The first incendiaries fell near the Sumida River. Each cluster of bombs exploded into dozens of smaller canisters, scattering napalm and white phosphorus across rooftops, streets, and open courtyards. Within seconds, entire blocks burst into flame. The fire spread faster than anyone could imagine. The strong northern wind whipped the flames into whirling funnels, feeding them with oxygen. Within minutes, Tokyo was burning in every direction. For the civilians below, there was no escape. The heat melted asphalt and boiled water in the canals. Mothers carried their children through smoke so thick it turned night into blindness. People fled toward the rivers, believing the water would save them, but the rivers became traps. Thousands jumped in, only to drown or suffocate as fire consumed the oxygen above the surface. Fire brigades tried to fight the flames, but their pumps ran dry. Their hoses melted in their hands. Inside his B-29, a young American bombardier named Raymond Tolliver watched the inferno from the air. Even at 10,000 feet, the turbulence from the rising heat shook the plane violently. He later wrote that the city looked like a single enormous torch, a solid mass of fire. Many American crewmen were horrified by what they saw below. Others, hardened by years of war and propaganda, told themselves it was necessary, that every burning building was another step toward ending the conflict. On the ground, Japanese fire wardens and police tried to guide civilians toward open spaces, but the wind-driven firestorm moved faster than any human could run. The temperature at ground level exceeded 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt metal and turn human flesh to ash in seconds. Those who made it to the rivers watched the fire leap the water and consume the opposite banks. The sound of the flames drowned out the screams. By 2 a.m., central Tokyo was a living furnace. The bombers continued to circle and drop more incendiaries in a deliberate pattern, creating overlapping zones of destruction. The smoke rose so high it reached 30,000 feet, where it collided with the bombers' flight paths. Some crews had to fly through clouds of debris, their oxygen systems clogging with ash. A few planes were lost to engine fires or turbulence, but the majority completed their runs and returned to Guam. Below them, Tokyo ceased to exist as a city. By dawn, nearly 16 square miles of the capital were gone, an area larger than Manhattan's entire midsection. Over 100,000 people lay dead, most burned beyond recognition. 1 million more were left homeless. Entire families had vanished overnight. The imperial palace, though untouched, was surrounded by a ring of blackened ruins stretching to the horizon. Survivors wandered through smoldering streets, searching for loved ones among the bodies. The air was still thick with smoke, and the smell of burnt wood and flesh hung for days. General Curtis LeMay received the reports with cold precision. From a military perspective, the mission had been a success beyond expectations. He noted that Tokyo's urban area had been 90% destroyed in selected districts. For LeMay, the message was clear: firebombing worked. Similar raids would soon follow, devastating Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and dozens of smaller cities. Yet even LeMay admitted privately, "If we lose this war, we'll be tried as war criminals." In Japan, the shock was overwhelming. The government censored the full extent of the destruction, but word spread quickly among survivors. People spoke in whispers about the night of fire, about the sky raining flames, about families who simply vanished. The illusion that Japan's home islands were safe was shattered forever. Many began to question the wisdom of continuing a war that could no longer be won. American newspapers reported the raid as a decisive blow to Japan's industrial heart. Few questioned the human cost. In Washington, officials praised the operation as proof that air power could break an enemy's will to fight. But among some in the military, unease grew. The scale of civilian death was unprecedented, even for total war. One pilot, years later, said quietly, "We burned a city alive." For the survivors of Tokyo, the memory of that night never faded. They rebuilt from ashes, but the scars remained. In the skin of those who escaped the fire, in the empty lots where neighborhoods once stood, in the silence of families who lost everything. The Tokyo firebombing became a ghost that haunted the nation, an unspoken horror overshadowed only months later by the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Operation Meeting House achieved its objective: the destruction of Japan's capital and the breaking of its spirit. But in doing so, it raised a question that would echo for generations. How far can humanity go in the name of victory? The night Tokyo burned was more than a military operation. It was a turning point in human history, when war descended from the skies not to fight armies, but to erase cities. And when the flames finally died, the world was left to face what it had become. When dawn broke over Tokyo on March 10, 1945, the city was unrecognizable. The once crowded neighborhoods of Shitamachi had vanished beneath a desert of ash. Smoke still curled from the ruins, rising in thin gray columns toward a lifeless sky. The smell of charred wood and human remains lingered for miles. A light wind blew over streets that no longer existed, and among the rubble the survivors began to move. They emerged from shelters and riverbanks, eyes red from smoke, clothes burned to rags. Many walked barefoot over still-hot debris, searching for family members who had not returned. Mothers carried the remains of children wrapped in blankets. Others wandered silently, their minds shattered beyond words. The survivors called it Yakiato no Asa, the morning of the burned ruins. It was the beginning of Japan's reckoning. Over 100,000 people were dead. Another million were homeless. Entire districts of Tokyo had disappeared overnight. The government tried to restore order, but even the police and fire brigades had been wiped out. Emperor Hirohito was informed of the devastation, but official reports softened the truth. Japan's leaders clung to the illusion of control, even as their empire crumbled around them. In the weeks that followed, funeral pyres burned along the banks of the Sumida River. The ashes of the dead were gathered into urns, often mixed together because no one could tell who was who. Priests chanted over the ruins, their voices drowned by the wind. Yet, despite the horror, the government continued to preach resistance. Newspapers claimed the spirit of the Japanese people remains unbroken. But beneath those words, morale was collapsing. General Curtis LeMay, thousands of miles away in Guam, saw the results in reconnaissance photos. Vast black scars where Tokyo had once stood. For him, the mission had proven that firebombing could break Japan faster than any invasion. Over the next months, his bombers would repeat the same tactic across Japan's cities. Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama, all turned into fields of fire. By summer, 67 cities had been burned. Nearly half of Japan's urban area was gone. Meanwhile, the Allied blockade strangled the country. Factories stood silent without fuel. Rice harvests failed. Trains carried refugees instead of soldiers. American B-29s roamed the skies without opposition. The Japanese military still spoke of honor and sacrifice, but the war was already lost. Only no one dared to say it aloud. Inside Tokyo, the government's propaganda machine urged citizens to prepare for a decisive battle on the home islands. Schoolgirls trained with bamboo spears. Civilians dug trenches in the hope of repelling an American invasion that might never come. People whispered that the emperor would fight to the last man. But what they feared most was the next air raid, because now, every night, the sky burned somewhere over Japan. For the ordinary citizen, survival became a matter of chance. Families moved to the countryside. Those who stayed lived among ruins, rebuilding with scraps of tin and wood. Tokyo was no longer a capital, it was a graveyard. The once proud heart of the empire had become a warning of what was to come. Then, in August 1945, came something beyond even the firebombings. On August 6th, an American B-29 named Enola Gay dropped a single atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another fell on Nagasaki. The destruction was instantaneous. Cities vaporized in seconds, tens of thousands killed in a blinding flash. The firestorms of Tokyo seemed almost primitive in comparison. Japan's leaders, faced with the reality of annihilation, could no longer deny the inevitable. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito addressed his people by radio for the first time in history. His voice was calm, almost distant, as he announced Japan's surrender. For the citizens who heard it, many could not even understand his formal, archaic language. But the meaning was clear. The war was over. The empire had fallen. When American occupation forces entered Tokyo, they found a city of ghosts. Streets once filled with soldiers and parades were now lined with ruins. Children played among wrecked trolleys. Women washed clothes in the same rivers where bodies had once floated. Yet even amid the desolation, there was movement, a quiet determination to rebuild. Japan, stripped of its empire and its illusions, began to rise again from the ashes. General Douglas MacArthur arrived in late August, taking command of the occupation. He walked through the ruins of Tokyo, stunned by the scale of destruction. The Japanese called him the Shinsei no Kami, the god of rebirth, because he came not with vengeance, but with a blueprint for reconstruction. Under American supervision, Japan began a transformation that would turn it from a militarist empire into a democratic nation. The same land that had burned so completely would soon become one of the world's most advanced societies. But for those who lived through the firebombings, the scars never faded. Survivors spoke little of that night. The shame, the loss, and the memory of bodies piled in the rivers haunted them until death. Japan rarely discussed the Tokyo firebombing openly, overshadowed by Hiroshima and Nagasaki in history books. Yet among historians, one fact remains undeniable. Operation Meeting House killed more people in a single night than any bombing raid in human history. In the years after the war, Curtis LeMay returned to America as a hero, though privately he admitted, "Killing civilians bothers me, but what choice did we have? They started it." For Japan, the justification was meaningless. The flames of Tokyo had erased an entire generation. Decades later, Tokyo stands reborn, a city of neon lights and towering skyscrapers. But beneath its modern surface lie the ghosts of 1945. Beneath train stations and shopping streets are the same neighborhoods that once burned. Every March, some still gather near the Sumida River to remember, to whisper the names of those lost in the firestorm that changed their nation forever. The Inferno of Tokyo marked the end of an age, the death of the old empire and the birth of a new Japan. From the ashes of destruction came the understanding that no victory is worth the loss of humanity itself. The empire shattered, the war ended, and the world stepped into the atomic age. But the night Tokyo burned, and the silence that followed, still remind us of the true cost of war.